From battlefield to bomb shelter, from home front to hospital, from volunteer rosters to victims lists, women experience war in distinctive, gendered ways. These are their stories. These are their voices. Welcome to Voices of Women at Wartime, a podcast by the Center for Women's Justice in Israel. I'm Rivka Lubitch, and I'm with Susan Weiss today.
Hi, Rivka. I'm happy to be here. And today we are talking with Anna Rethmann. Anna is a doctoral candidate in philosophy at the Free University of Berlin. Since November 2022, she is also a PhD fellow at the Jacob Robinson Institute for the History of Individual and Collective Rights at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Anna has 2 master's degrees, one in social anthropology, law, and political science, and the other in library and information science studies. Anna has worked on developing educational strategies against anti-Semitism. And in her current doctoral project, she focuses on post-1945 human rights debates. She is particularly interested in the concept of dignity as a human right and in the political implications of individual human rights versus collective human rights. And on a personal note, let me just tell our listeners that Anna and I met in the locker room of the Hebrew University swimming pool. We swim together on a regular basis. Hello, Anna.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Anna, and thank you so much for coming on to this podcast and for being with us today. It is really our pleasure and our honor. Today, we want to talk about dignity, collective human rights, and anti-Semitism. In short, all the subjects that interest you and are so relevant today, all in a half an hour, of course. I'm sure we can fit it all in.
Okay, but before we get into the important ideas, Anna, we'd like to know a little bit more about you. Where are you from? How did you get to the Hebrew University?
I'm from Germany. I'm actually living in Berlin, and I'm here in Jerusalem since November 22 because of the PhD fellowship I got at the Jacob Robinson Institute. So I'm here now for almost a little bit more than a year living in Jerusalem right now. And yeah.
And where were you on October 7th?
Actually, on October 7th, I was in Montreal on a conference about human rights and democracy. And I was not here in Jerusalem. And I woke up because I had kind of a jet lag. And I saw the news immediately, and a lot of friends wrote to me and my colleagues here in Jerusalem, of course, as well. So it was a very stressful moment and strange moment to be far away and at the same time getting all the news from people I knew. So during the whole conference, there were a lot of discussion. A lot of people asked how friends are doing. And so it was the major topic in the conference from that moment on. And so my flight was canceled. I had a flight with Air Canada, and actually I wanted to go after the conference to Berlin to visit some family and friends. The flight was back then to Germany, not to Israel. So I stayed there about 2 weeks, and then the travel agent of the university could find me a flight back to Israel with El Al, and so I decided to come back.
Did it occur to you not to come? Did you have thoughts of not coming back because it's so dangerous and we were all really scared here?
It was a really strange moment. My boss here at the university told me that there's no pressure to come back. And there was a lot of small decisions that made me come back. I think it's a very personal question. I don't have family here, so it's not that I'm forced to come back. But there were a lot of small, for me, important moments. And when I was living now here for more than 12 months, I had kind of my daily life was now here in Jerusalem. All my, like from the pragmatic point, all the health insurance, apartment, books, all is now here in Jerusalem and not in Berlin anymore. And on the second point, for me, but it's really a personal question. I don't want to say that is for everybody like this. It didn't feel very well to stay here in Berlin while kind of friends and colleagues are here in Jerusalem. It would be strange for me coming back after the war and say, hey, I'm here. How are you? Everything went
I fled the war. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't feel well for me. So then the travel agency, she wrote a very nice email, and then I was, well, okay, you found a flight back to Jerusalem or to Tel Aviv, so I will take it. And yeah, of course, at the airport in Berlin, you have a lot of security checkups with El Al in general, but at this time a little bit more. And people were asking a lot of questions why I'm coming back. And it was a strange moment. All the people who came back in this flight, it was only half booked. It was only Israelis and I think some journalists, and it was only half booked. It was a very strange, dense atmosphere. And when I came back to Jerusalem, the train station was empty in the middle of the day. Normally, Jerusalem, the central station is crowded.
Right. Okay, so before we ask you about your work, what can you tell us about Germany's response to October 7th, the German government, German academia?
The first responses were quite clear. They condemned immediately the Hamas attacks from the political level, like the state representatives. And I would say part of the civil society as well. But shortly after the 7th of October, there are some groups who then immediately started to repeat the same narrative they always apply to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think this is a mistake. I think what happened on the 7th of October is something really different. And to explain it in normal categories of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is kind of misleading and misunderstanding the situation. I think this is what Hamas did on the 7th of October is a new quality. And I think a lot of people then fell back in the traditional explanation and accused more the Netanyahu government, the failure of allowing a two-state solution or whatever. And then they are immediately blaming Israel of attacking Gaza, starting the war. So this was a strange moment that what happened on the 7th of October very fast disappeared in these discussions. I wouldn't say in the media. I think in the media it was quite well reported, but I would say in some social or movements, and especially in the bigger cities, especially in Berlin at the universities, there was a kind of immediately reaction that blamed Israeli politics really on a one-sided way and blamed them for being responsible what happened on the 7th of October, if you wanted to put it very in a polemic way. So yeah, and it's still going on until today. There's a lot of BDS activists now going on. I wouldn't say in every city, but Berlin is kind of a hotspot where it's kind of difficult now for Israelis to, I don't know, to talk as well. There were 2 weeks ago, the judge, Daphne Barak Erez, was invited to a conference, and they had to
protect her and take her away, I think.
Had to take away to stop the conference for a while and then do it after this in a smaller circle. So I think this is kind of becoming kind of really aggressive mood right now.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your work on human rights. And what I'd like to know is about your work on dignity and how is that different from human rights, if at all? And what's the difference between individual human rights and collective human rights? And then getting back to what we were speaking about now, what I'm wondering about is, can we talk about human rights at all? Can we talk about dignity at all? Can we talk about honor at all after October 7th, after the Sabbath massacre? I kind of feel that right now, all we can talk about is us or them, and not human rights at all. So I know those are a lot of questions all at once, but if you could address them, that would be terrific.
Yeah, thank you. That's a huge question, but yeah, I will try to answer this. I would definitely say that human rights are really in troubled times right now, and how to deal with this. And I think it's one of the major questions we are facing right now. So Coming back to your question, the relation between dignity and human rights, that is quite interesting. When the UN Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed in 1948, it was the first time that the concept of dignity became not only a concept which was just named in the proclamation, but it was also in Article 1 described as a human right. And this is quite unique. And this means that it becomes a kind of a legal concept. And what does it mean? Like you can't really say that human dignity is a right, and you can go to trial and say, I want my human dignity, something like this. Yeah. So it's complicated. So what it means, I think it's, so you have to go a step backward and see what does dignity try to explain here. And I try to explain it with a certain theoretical background from the critical theory, the early Frankfurt School, and Ernst Bloch, who connected dignity to the concept of the upright gait. And that means that every person needs to have the opportunity to express themselves, to try to determine their own purpose in life, and then to find his own or her own way to determine
to tell their story or something, to
their story, their own purpose in life. So what on the political side, this means that politicians or the political system needs to provide the conditions that everybody is actually able to do so. And this means, of course, economic and political preconditions that allow people to determine their own purpose in life. So this is one part. And on the other hand, it means as well from the individual part that you try to, I don't know, it's not without preconditions on the individual side. It means that assume personal responsibilities. The dignity, the upright gait has 2 points or 2 sides. On the one hand, you can say it forces the political system to provide conditions, economic conditions, social conditions, political conditions that allow everybody to express themselves, to articulate critique, to speak for themselves. This is one part, and it's focusing on the conditions, which is not in the realm of the individual. Yeah? And on the other hand, dignity means as well, or demands from the individual to take personal responsibility for its own decisions. This is then connected to what you were asking, what are individual rights and what are collective human rights? And this is the whole discussion in the human rights debates after 48. So in the 60s, there's a huge shift in the human rights debates when dignity was not anymore discussed in the 66 conventions on political and civil rights and the social, economic, and cultural rights. So the focus was more on self-determination. So in the first articles of these 2 conventions, the self-determination was much more in focus than the personal or individual dignity concept, which was more in focus in 48.
I think I need an example, like what would it mean, the individual human right compared to the collective human rights? If you're ultra religious, what would that mean? Or if you're a Black person in a white community, what does all this mean?
In the human rights debates, you have the discussion about like 3 groups of rights. You have the famous ones, which is of the 60s as well. It's the civil and political rights. And these are the traditional individual political rights, the right to free speech and the right to vote and all these things. And then you have in the same period of time, you have the right, which were more bounded in the social, culture, and economic rights, but they were still focused on the individual. And then there's a third group of human rights, and this is the right of development, the right to peace, and all the stuff, which is more connected to groups that have access to, not as an individual, but as a group, to certain rights.
Isn't group rights the right to have a nation? Wouldn't you consider that a collective right?
Exactly. And this is a critical point which were discussed in the 60s as well. There were voices who said, if we put these rights these collective rights in the margin of human rights discourses become very difficult, because then the collective and the individual are in kind of conflict. And these voices or these people didn't say that there aren't any group rights, but they said they shouldn't be part of human rights. And I think that you're quite right. I think what is important to know is that what is the subject of human rights and what is the condition of human rights. And I think the conditions would be kind of group rights, or like maybe the right to a state or something like this.
Aren't we seeing now that collective group rights seem to be trumping individual rights? If we look at the Hamas war also, it seems that the group rights of the Palestinians and the group rights of the Gazans are trumping the individual rights of Israelis to be safe from rape, from beheading, from the massacre. That's at least how I am looking at it. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, in a way, I would say this. And even like, it's not only that the Israeli rights massively were under attack on the 7th of October, especially what you were focusing on your podcast as well, the brutal attacks on women on that day, and it was negated by a lot of human rights and women rights organizations. So this raises a lot of question how human rights organizations in general respond to these atrocities. On the other hand, Palestinians are suffering from Hamas terror as well. So they don't have any individual rights in Gaza. Women rights don't really exist in Gaza. If you only see blocks like the Palestinians without focusing on the internal problems and conflicts in the society of the Palestinian society, then you can only see this in a very rigid way, Israel against Palestinians. And that's not true. Like you see, and I think until now, international law and especially human rights law don't have an answer to the question how to deal with groups like Hamas, and especially with their war strategy. And I know it's like always on the media, but that how do we deal with these kind of terrorist groups who are using their own people as human shields? You know that it's always now in the media like this, but yeah, I think international law hasn't found an answer to this question.
So human rights is really under re-examination right now. How does human rights relate to what's happening in the Islamic world, or as it finds its expression in terrorism?
Yeah, and I think it's this is the focus which is sometimes getting lost if we only talk about group rights, is how important it is that political entities, states, or the situation with the Palestinians, yeah, how important it is that there's a democratic movement in these communities, in the society as well, to have a peaceful environment with other states as well. I think this is quite important issue. And if you only focus on groups, then you only have this typical explanation of Israel against Palestinians, and without mentioning the dynamics which are in play here as well.
How do you understand the response of the UN to the Hamas massacre? If the UN is supposed to be the champion of human rights, then how do you explain its silence? And how do you explain the silence of feminists who champion human rights? How do you explain their silence in the face of the massacre?
I don't know, then we would have the solution for a lot of problems today. So I'm not totally surprised by it, but in a way, I'm shocked that there was a negation of the most obvious what has happened. I can only explain it with what I was saying before. I think people are so stuck in their views, how they see the conflict and the situation in the Middle East through their lenses. This is a powerful Israel against the Palestinians. And I think I only can understand this in this way. And that is, and maybe they are more afraid of being racist or Islamophobic than of really seeing what's going on the 7th of October. I think because it disturbs the whole narrative people have about this conflict as well.
Would you say that it's just anti-Semitism? Because there are a lot of people that didn't like to use the word, didn't go around saying that, oh, anti-Semites, anti-Semites. But suddenly after this, there is a feeling that it's just plain anti-Semitism.
Yeah, look, it's really heartbreaking to see people tearing down the posters of those kidnapped by Hamas and repeating these, and these are a lot of young people as well, no? It's and repeating things like Hamas is a liberation movement or something like this. So leaving out the 7th of October and only focusing on the war after the 7th of October, it's like telling only the half-truths. Yeah, I think in a way, telling only the half-truths is an expression of an anti-Semitic perspective, no? I wouldn't say that everybody is an anti-Semite. This is maybe too harsh, but I think like leaving out this important question, what was going on the 7th of October, the brutal attacks on Israel, and especially the brutal killings of innocent people, leaving out this most obvious things, yeah, I would say it's at least an expression of an anti-Semitic perspective.
Rivka and I are proud Israelis, but we are also very critical of what's happening in Israel. And we've spent our whole careers criticizing the entanglement of church and state in Israel, for example, and religious coercion. And both of us were very active in protesting against the reforms that had been introduced by the Netanyahu government. As an outsider to Israel, what do you see as Israel's biggest challenge today?
Yeah, very interesting. I was spending the last 12 months here and I saw the diverse society here in Israel. And sometimes now coming again back to what's going on right now, abroad people equate often Israelis with the Netanyahu government. They don't do it with Palestinians and Hamas. Here they always differentiate, and that's right, to differentiate between Hamas and Palestinians. But why don't they do it here with Israel? It was in the last 12 months, I never saw such a strong civil society movement than what I was seeing here in the last 12 months. The biggest challenge is the attack on the rule of law, is the attack on the basic law, human dignity and liberty, because these are the internal critical mechanism Israel has, which makes it a democracy, a vivid democracy. And now you have a lot of conflicts, internal conflicts in Israel between the rule of law, checks and balances, and the exaggerated power of the executive. So that, I think it is one and still one of the most important and biggest challenges.
I think that's one thing that we felt in our work in our NGO was how the executive has gained so much power over the individual. And I, for one, would agree with you. There's one more question, and that's a question about multiculturalism, because I think, and this is perhaps to end it on a more positive note, I think that you can say something about Israel that we have been able to incorporate a multicultural ethos in the country to the extent that the Israeli Arab population has to a large extent been integrated into Israel. How do you relate to that? And how do you relate to the fact that it seems that in Europe, they haven't been able to adopt that multicultural ethos? Is there something that Europe can learn from us?
Yeah, this is really very interesting. When I was in Berlin on a conference 2 weeks ago, I was saying this as well, and people asked me about how the situation at the university is and all this stuff. And I don't know if you ever been to the Mount Scopus campus, and you see a lot of diverse students there, the different backgrounds there. And I was very much impressed how, in a way, people from so different backgrounds live in one city together, especially Jerusalem, and it's not clashing all the time. It clashes a lot, on the same time, it is possible to live and to study together. And I think the leadership of the university, the Hebrew University, showed a lot of openness and support for the different groups who were under attack during the judicial overhaul process, and now especially how to deal with the conflict of Palestinian students, Jewish students who are now in the war. So you have to handle a lot of diversity. And I think this is a good example that it can work. It's a lot of strength you need to put in it, but it's possible. And multiculturalism, I think, yeah, if you only look at in blocks like this group and not on the individual who's in each of these groups, then it becomes really problematic because you need to focus on internal dynamics in these groups. And sometimes I wouldn't say that it all failed in Europe or in Germany. It's not a whole failure. But I think what one should focus much more is on internal dynamics in special communities. For example, if you see the demonstration in Berlin in favor or in support of the Israeli citizens after October 7th, you see a lot of exiled people from Iran or from the Kurdish community who were in solidarity with Israel. And it's always said that they know how it is to live under an Islamistic regime. So it's very interesting to see these voices and to listen to these voices. A lot of feminist groups from these communities spoke out in favor of Israeli women and supporting the women rights movement here in Israel as well. So I think these are groups that it's worth staying in contact and to support their voices, the liberal voices in these communities. And so I think in this point, it's very interesting to see how Israel managed it and not managed it, and how other countries do it in this way. But yeah, you see the conflict is a global conflict. We all saw this. It's in every street in this world, and this makes it not easier, definitely not. No.
I just want to tell that my son-in-law, who's been in Gaza since the beginning, he just got out a few weeks ago and then he was called up again. In every single house this is negating what you said before about what we all think, that Hamas is ruling over these very lovely people, Palestinians who really want to be at peace with us. Every single house they went into, every single school, every single football stadium had booby traps and there's weapons all over. Every single place they went into, under cribs of babies, every single house. It's like the whole country is just there trying to attack us. They have a whole city built underneath. All their money they put into building these tunnels underneath where they come up from the bottom, from nowhere, and preparing to kill the Israelis. Anyway, I just wanted to say that because we have this feeling that Hamas took over and everyone else are peace lovers. But when they went in, the feeling is that they're all there to kill us.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point, and I think that makes the whole situation very complicated. No, I think it is very important to distinguish between Hamas and Palestinians, but yes, there is a Hamas culture in the Palestinian society at the same time.
Especially if I want to live, I'm not so sure that I can go around saying all day that there's a difference between the Hamas and the Palestinians. I mean, I would like to be able to say that.
But there are voices in the Palestinian society who are reflecting that there's a culture of violence, that they're celebrating when Jews are dead, and they are celebrating in the streets, and this is a problem. And these voices are very rare, or it's dangerous to express. But yeah, I would say this is one of the biggest problems, and the international community needs to react on this. It's like it was now all over the news, but it was shocking. If you see some of the footages on the 7th of October, when small children were spitting on half-naked women, that expresses a lot. And I think we can't and everything always with an optimistic view. I think we live in very, very difficult times and very tough times. And I think it's always saying, yeah, peace dialogue is nice, it's nice, but you need a counterpart as well. I think now it's a time, and this is a big challenge, not becoming cynical, not becoming, I would say now it's like very like a right-wing version, but still believing in humanity, but keep your head in reality, what's going on. This is
Right.
very important, I think.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anne, for talking with us today. It was a fascinating conversation, and I'm so glad Susan met you swimming. Keep it up, both of you. I should probably be swimming myself. There's so much more to talk to you about, but our time is running out. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. By listening to this podcast and giving women's voices your attention, you give them power. If you, like us, agree that women's perspectives are essential to the Israeli narrative, subscribe to the Voices of Women at Wartime wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a rating and encourage your friends to listen and subscribe too. If you have thoughts, questions, or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on social media on the Center for Women's Justice page on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. In addition, we appreciate any amount via our donation button that will help support our work. Thank you, Rabbi Scott Kahn, for recording and editing. I am Rivka Lubitch, and I was here today with Susan Weiss. Be well and stay safe.